Welcome to Commercial Real Estate Pro Network CREPN Radio. Thanks for joining us. My name is Jay Darren Gross. This is the podcast focused on commercial real estate investment and risk management strategies. Weekly, we have conversations with commercial real estate investors and professionals who provide their experience and insight to help you grow your real estate portfolio. Today, my guest is Yakov Smart. Yakov is considered to be the leading expert when it comes to attracting A-list investors and raising capital using LinkedIn. He's the author of Disrupting LinkedIn and a sought-after authority by top business owners and sales leaders worldwide. Yakov has shared the stage with Samantha DiBianchi of Bravo's hit TV show Million Dollar Listing, and he's been a guest on numerous media outlets. As a resident of Scottsdale, Arizona, today Yakov is a proud leader of LinkedIn Enterprises, where his webinars, on-demand training programs, and strategic consulting accelerators give people proven tools and techniques for transforming their LinkedIn profiles into priceless relationship-building assets. And in just a minute, we're going to speak with Yakov about how to raise capital and attract high net worth investors using LinkedIn. But first, a quick reminder, if you like our show, CREPN Radio, there are a couple things you can do to help us. You can like, you can share, and you can subscribe. And as always, we would love to hear from you. Please leave a comment. Also, if you'd like to see how handsome our guests are, be sure to check out our YouTube channel, and you'll find us at Commercial Real Estate Pro Network on YouTube. And also, don't forget, please subscribe. With that, I want to welcome my guest, Yakov. Welcome to CREPN Radio.
Good to be here. Thank you for having me.
Well, I'm excited to talk with you in this digital age about marketing and leveraging LinkedIn. But before we get started, if you could take just a moment and share a little bit more about your background with the listeners.
Certainly. So I'll give you some brief insight into my background here. I started on social media you mentioned digital marketing and marketing online. I always, when I tell people the story, I always start in a bit of an unusual place because I've been on social media since about the 8th grade. So I started back in MySpace, and I think a lot of your listeners will remember MySpace. That's where I started my journey on digital marketing. And back then I wasn't using it for business necessarily. I was using it to hit on girls. So that's when I got my start on social media. The way I got started on LinkedIn was a bit more intentional and a bit different. I was selling software for a startup software firm, and I was having a lot of trouble and frustration for making cold calls. Basically, the only way that I had of prospecting and lead generation was smiling and dialing. It was driving me crazy. So out of necessity, I turned to LinkedIn as a different way, and I inadvertently stumbled upon a new way of using LinkedIn for growing businesses. And, I was living in Vegas at the time and started taking on private clients and turning it into a business. And you mentioned Disrupting LinkedIn, authored that book a little while ago, and since then became known as one of the top authorities when it comes to using LinkedIn to generate leads and attract A-list clients. And the way that I got into working with people in the real estate space, especially when it comes to raising capital and attracting investors, which I know is the focus of our conversation today. I was at a forum for entrepreneurs, and a couple of gentlemen approached me, and they were intrigued by the concept of using LinkedIn to connect angel investors, so people who are high net worth individuals, and founders of companies. And they were putting together these deal clubs, and they had a vision for running these deal clubs in major markets across the world. And they asked me if I thought it was possible to approach extremely high net worth individuals, people who were in venture capital, angel investors, people worth sometimes hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars, and get them interested in this concept using LinkedIn. And I said that I thought it did, and I took them on as clients. And it was fascinating to see just the caliber of people who we could find on LinkedIn, and using the strategies and the methodologies that you and I are going to talk about today, getting them interested in their case, attending the deal clubs and investing in these types of startups. So those are some of the hardest to reach decision makers out there. And that was sort of the starting point in my entry into the world of raising capital, where, at around the same time, I had a lot of influencers in the real estate syndication, real estate investment space reach out to me. And, we worked on a couple different projects. And at this point, my primary focus of the students I work with and the mentees that I have inside of our various programs is around a new way of using LinkedIn to attract high net worth investors and raise capital. And it's funny because LinkedIn has changed a lot, which we can talk about the changes as well. But it's funny because a lot of people in real estate, a lot of real estate entrepreneurs, especially entrepreneurs in commercial real estate, may still see LinkedIn as a resume platform where people go to update their resumes. And what we're going to talk about today is a new way and a very prolific and powerful way of attracting high net worth individuals using LinkedIn.
Well, I mean, everything you said there from the beginning of eighth grade and MySpace to, now you're attracting high caliber angel investors. That's a journey that I think everybody'd like to have the fast track, the shortcut on. I'm assuming on MySpace you were kind of nurturing your prospective leads in order to attract the dates. Is that kind of that nurturing thing? Is that kind of a key to your approach? I mean, we can get into more detail, but I'm just kind of curious. I think a lot of times people think of sales as being like almost like a shopping cart mentality, as opposed to more of the nurturing kind of thing.
So, it's funny. I don't think anybody's ever asked a question quite like that, comparing MySpace and LinkedIn. And I would say that I wasn't very successful using MySpace to hit on girls. So I think those strategies could sort of be left behind us. But I see what you mean, because MySpace was a platform for at least making those connections in that context, right? Versus LinkedIn. And when people work with us and they want to accomplish this, the big thing is, yes, nurturing leads. And there is a lot of value in nurturing and, getting in front of people and having that consistency and relevancy. And it's LinkedIn has a lot of different tools and features for accomplishing that. But the biggest thing is, I don't want people to put unnecessary hurdles between them and investors. I'm a big proponent of direct response as well. And so I'll give you the methodology and we can go into, any of the different nuances of it. But the first piece is being able to build a list of investors. So I call it magnetizing to your list. And what that comes down to is using the various searches inside of LinkedIn. There's several ways you can build lists of high net worth individuals on LinkedIn. And there's different angles for building a list as well. And when I say magnetizing your list, I mean finding a list of the people who are going to be perfect potential investors for you, right? So, I have people who want to attract institutional investors. I have people who want investors from family offices. I have people who want local dentists or attorneys or military personnel. These are all different angles, all people you could potentially find on LinkedIn because there's 675 million users on LinkedIn. So it starts with magnetizing and building that list and getting really specific. The next piece, and this is really, if there's a secret sauce here, or if there's something that really makes this thing go, it's the messaging, right? So I call it accelerating trust using messaging, because what your listeners need to understand, and this is really key because of, the world has changed recently, building a relationship with an investor online outside of your current sphere of influence is significantly different than it would be in person, right? And the big difference is the level of trust or lack thereof. Because let's say you go to a local, REI club meeting or a networking event or, whatever the case may be, an in-person event, and you meet someone who's a prospective investor and you start to have a conversation. Unless they're just completely rude and inconsiderate, they're not going to walk away as you're in mid-sentence. They're not just going to turn their shoulder, walk away, and go talk to someone else, because that would just be really impolite, and most people wouldn't do that. Well, online, if you don't immediately grab their attention and start building curiosity and trust, they can say next, and they probably have 5 other windows open on their phone or on their computer. So there's a lot more distraction. And it's about getting them to care first and having them understand what's in it for them. So on LinkedIn, there's 3 important places for your messaging. There is your LinkedIn content, so what you can be posting onto LinkedIn. There's your LinkedIn profile, which you can make very attractive to those ideal investors. And it's a big topic of conversation. And then there's the actual messaging, the direct type of messages that you can send to people where you can reach your potential investors directly. So that messaging, tailoring it the right way to build trust is of utmost importance. It can make the world of a difference between you getting somebody interested and responsive and wanting to take that conversation beyond LinkedIn versus somebody just not even giving you the time of day. So that accelerating trust is a big thing. And then the next part of the methodology, once you've got a system for doing that, you want to be able to delegate it, okay? Because it's my contention that real estate entrepreneurs shouldn't be doing the day-to-day management once they've got a system that's reliable for generating investor leads on LinkedIn. So we want to look at how do we reverse engineer a system that you can then delegate to an assistant, intern, family member, whatever the case may be, and make it very much so they can follow along and just for them, make it a matter of what buttons to push. And then the final piece is actually enrolling investors, okay? The transitions to getting a conversation offline, okay? And then what happens when they're interested? How do you nurture that lead further that when you have a project or a deal, you're staying in front of them and top of mind? So there's a lot of nuances. There's a lot of different parts here, but it is, the best approach there. And you mentioned a really good point is, yes, you want to nurture, but you also want that direct type of lead generation as well for accelerating trust. So there's both facets to it.
Well, everything you mentioned there, I'm familiar with the terms. I think that there's a kind of a thought process with online marketing that there's, a lot of sites have like a shopping cart, and it's a matter of somebody sees something, or Amazon, just think of Amazon, for example, you see the object, you click it, you buy now, and in a couple of days it shows up on your doorstep unless you've got your, your Prime membership, something like that. And, but I think the reality is, especially in higher ticket items, is that the nurturing part of it. I think sometimes people forget that, just like if you were calling on somebody, in person, the first time you meet them, you might just kind of introduce yourself, get to know them, then maybe send it was nice to meet you, kind of note, then maybe follow up with something, but just that process kind of thing, understanding the full cycle, from somebody from an unknown, maybe a suspect, to a client kind of thing. And so you mentioned three things there: the content, the profile, and the messaging. And I guess I'm kind of curious: is there any one of those you find to be more important, or one that could more easily jeopardize a go forward?
So here's the order of importance. And this is true in most cases when it comes to attracting investors. That profile, I mean, the LinkedIn profiles have gotten to be so important. Other than your website, for attracting investors online, it's your most important marketing asset. It's by far more important than any other social media profile. And it's so much more than just a resume, right? I mean, there's a few big mistakes that I see real estate entrepreneurs making with their LinkedIn profiles. There's three big ones, actually, besides not having one. The first one is going the whole corporate resume approach, right? So it's having something that sounds stuffy and professional. Your LinkedIn profile, if you want to truly attract the high net worth investors and raise capital, it shouldn't be an executive bio. That's not what we're talking about here, right? The next mistake that I see is what we call the wide-eyed squirrel, where someone looks like they're doing 5 different businesses scattered all over the place. And again, that very quickly diminishes trust. And the third key mistake that I often see is what I call the 90s marketing brochure. It's when somebody is trying really hard and it's coming and they're talking all features and benefits, and it's coming across as super contrived and salesy, right? So I don't recommend any of those three approaches. The approach that I recommend for your profile is, what if you could get somebody, when they look at your profile, to instantly understand this is for them and start building intrigue and trust? Okay, that's what your profile needs to be accomplishing. No matter how long you've been in the business, if somebody feels seen and understood, you can cut through the noise. And that's often the key to doing that. So the profile is a good foundational piece in getting people to decide whether or not they're going to give you the time of day, whether or not you're an authority. It's funny you mentioned Amazon and shopping carts, because those things are all, for the most part, product businesses are commodities. You buy something 20, 30 bucks. Okay. That's a commodity. A lot of us don't think twice about it versus, if you're asking somebody to write you a check for 250 grand, that's, there's a little more thought and trust that goes into that, obviously. So you want to get past commoditization. And the best way to do that is to become an authority. And your LinkedIn profile is certainly a great asset for doing that. Now, other than your profile, your messaging, the direct messages that you're able to send to someone on LinkedIn can be much more powerful and important than posting content. I mean, I tell people this all the time. You don't necessarily even need to post content to generate significant leads on LinkedIn. Content is a way to supplement and nurture. But for the direct lead generation, you can distribute your content through direct messages, right? I never, the big mistake that I see with direct messaging, people go for that sort of one-shot kill, right? Where they, try to come up with the perfect sales pitch. And I call it the vomit message, where it's like, ugh, they just like, vomit their entire life story and pitch and all the features and benefits there. And it's a complete turnoff, to be on the receiving end of that. So it's having multiple steps, nurturing that lead. And the very first thing you have to do is that person needs to raise their hand and say, yes, I'm interested in learning more. Yes, I've got questions. Yes, this sounds like it might be interesting.
Yeah, I think we're all, or at least I can speak for myself, just the fatigue of your inbox with messages that are the full offer when I've never met the person, have no idea what they do, and it's not just a hey, nice to meet you. It's got the full meal deal with links and kind of thing. And I've always been wondering, like, do they work? I mean, because I just look at them and just go, a little overload there. So let's talk about the strategy, the direct messaging strategy that you utilize. Is there a formula to that? Is it kind of an intro warm up? Do you have any kind of an approach that you recommend?
Well, it's not a one size fits all. Okay. So a lot of this is going to be just like your profile, just like content, just like anything you do. That's why we talk about magnetizing. You would talk to a college professor, for example, very differently than you would talk to a tech CEO. Probably different value systems, different ways of communicating, right? So there's not like some magic three-step formula that works every time, guaranteed, that just gets people to not be able to control themselves, right? That's just not really something that exists. However, as sort of a general rule of thumb, the very first piece is you've got to connect with that person, right? Because when you connect with that person, you have the ability to now message them directly. Okay, they're now in your sort of LinkedIn database, and when you aren't posting content, they're going to be much more likely to see it. They're going to start to see you as much more relevant. Next piece is, rather than pitching anything or making an offer right out of the gate, I recommend having at least one piece of educational content that you share with them in your message. Okay, something, and not without asking for anything either, just like you can share something that maybe you found on a third-party source like Forbes magazine or Entrepreneur. For example, let's say you're doing apartment investing, right? And you found, a Forbes article talking about the 3 surprising ways apartment investing is going to be one of the best alternative investments for the next 10 years. Something, and I just made that up, but something that's educational in favor of your type of investment. And you leave it at that. And then the follow-up can be, rather than, again, if you're ready to test the water, is ask them a question instead of laying the whole, meal on them like you talked about. So asking them, and inside LinkedIn Capital Raising Accelerator, when I work with people, we talk about, magic questions. So I'll give you a couple of examples. It's all about how you start with a magic question. So have you ever, could it be possible? Would you ever consider? What are your thoughts on, right? These are type of open-ended questions that you want to gauge somebody's temperature, because if they're not aware and if they're not interested, you've got to get them to raise their hand first. Otherwise, it becomes what big mistake that I see is, people talk to the wrong people, right? There's no need to, and the great thing about this too is you can automate a lot of the legwork. About 90% of this can be automated without looking automated. But the big thing is, if they're not interested yet, if they're not aware, then you have no business talking to them about the specifics of a deal, or even scheduling a call. It's a big waste of your time and theirs. So the messaging, this real strategic way to think about it is, what are all the different angles that they care about to make your messaging relevant to them? And can you get them to raise their hand and ask you a question or respond or say that they're interested?
So you mentioned kind of the different angles and the kind of qualifying. I'm kind of curious because, a lot of times I think digital marketing a lot of times is thought of as more of like a masses kind of a thing, as opposed to more of a select, or I guess I tend to think of it more of like it's in the numbers kind of thing. Do you find that by being more selective, like, first of all, I guess, do you identify your, what do you call it? There's an acronym, or there's some sort of word for it, but if you identify your specific type of your best possible client by character trait, and then you identify that, Yakov has these characteristics, he'd be a good prospect. And then do you find that I guess what I'm trying to ask is percentage chance of getting into a conversation? I mean, I assume there's still a numbers aspect to this, from a standpoint of not everybody's going to say, "Oh my God, this is I've been waiting for you to call." I mean, I've been looking for somebody on LinkedIn to talk to, and finally you've answered the bell. Can you speak a little bit to the percentage success you find when people are more selective about this and do this more of like in a personal way, as opposed to, we've already talked about all the ways that annoy people with, the full meal deal, out of the chute with not even introducing yourself?
So this is all about quality, right? This is about being specific and finding that quality investor. There is strength in numbers, especially as you're building this up. But what's great for a lot of people is if you find just one or two good, high net worth, relevant investors on LinkedIn, you build those relationships and they invest with you and they receive a return and they have a good experience. There's a certain psychology where they're likely to tell other people who are just like them. So it tends to snowball into referrals. That's why, this isn't digital marketing where you need tens of thousands of leads, right? I think those days, especially for attracting investors, are in the past. This is about, for a lot of people listening, maybe your pool of potential investors on LinkedIn is 500 or 2,000 or 3,000 or 5,000 people, right? And so not huge numbers, quality though, being really specific. And you can do that when you build a list on LinkedIn. What's great though is I'm big on automating the initial piece, right? So there's different softwares available where you can automate the legwork of the initial outreach. And the way that I always describe it's like good plastic surgery, right? When you have good plastic surgery, people shouldn't be able to tell. And when you see bad plastic surgery, you can almost always tell, right? And we have a lot of plastic surgery in Arizona, so I'm sort of become well versed in that regard. But my point is, with plastic surgery, right? It's like there's a natural element to it, right? Where, even though the message is short and concise, you're not manually reaching out to people, but it feels manual. It feels personalized. It feels specific based on the messaging. And then when they raise their hand, are in fact interested in the right person, that's when you can transition that conversation. That's when you can ask additional questions and move that relationship off of LinkedIn. So it's, not being in that, there's two sides of the coin, right? I don't want anyone being in that scarcity mindset of, oh no, there's only, X finite amount of people who have money. It's just not true. It's never been true. It's not true now. However, at the same time, if you've got a very specific criteria and there's only a couple hundred people that would match really well, It's going deep with that group and really, creating this big fish, small pond phenomenon, which works really, really well on LinkedIn.
Yeah, I think when you were, talking about that, it kind of reminded me that, the goal, keep in mind, what is the goal? The goal is first to get the connection so you can have that conversation. And then two, the goal is to get the conversation offline. Is it not? I mean, that
Absolutely.
you're not meant to stay online and it just be a click yes for, I've got millions I'll give you. That's not an option on the, on the landing page, right?
Right.
Um, so I think those are, I think, two things that I think get lost. And again, I like your sentiment about automating, because I think there's the initial stuff if you can automate it. But I'd be kind of curious on your experience when starting out. I'm assuming that people are still manually doing the messaging, trying to find what works for the process. Do you advise that people kind of keep track of, the process from those that work versus those that didn't work, to try and then to be able to then, you know, um, I guess, turn over that to some sort of an automated process, or what are your thoughts on that?
I think to test something and have metrics, everything, it needs to be metrics based. It's all about the numbers, right? Where we want to be as scientific as humanly possible. And you're absolutely right with reverse engineering that outcome, right? So is for someone who's an entrepreneur, I don't recommend that they manually sit there and manually send messages at first. It's just not the highest and best use of your time. I recommend, once you have the messaging down, automating out of the gate. The software actually tells you the metrics. It keeps track of that for you all in one place. It saves you a ton of time. And then you have some numbers, right? Because if you're, without getting too, scientific and analytical here, but if you only have 30 people that you've tested a message with, you don't know. I mean, you don't know much. No matter, how many people have responded, you don't know much. But what you're gonna notice are some common patterns. You're gonna notice, I call them the 8 buckets of different responses, and you're gonna notice what some of those are as you start reaching hundreds of people, and then you're gonna be able to course correct or double down on what's working. So I recommend automating right out of the gate. Now, there's best practices for automation, right? If you don't have any connections yet, not a good idea. But once you're past, like, let's say that 500 plus connections mark, and you have a bit of a foundation, to start testing different messages and different approaches, absolutely automate it. Because what automation allows you to do is, let's say you've got a list of 1,000 prospective investors, for example, on LinkedIn. You've built that list. You can get really specific. I think LinkedIn is the best list building tool in the world for getting accurate real-time data. The old way to do it was you had to go pay a list broker a few $1,000 for a list of accredited investors. By the time you got the list, half the list was outdated. They're really online. You can reach them on their mobile devices. Now, so let's say you have a list of 1,000 potential investors. You plug them into the software, you've got your messaging, you press that button. Every day there's 100 connection requests going out from you. There's going to be a percentage of those people that accept, and the follow-up, and I call it a messenger funnel, it's all automated. And as soon as they respond, that's when the automation stops. So it never looks canned, it never looks robotic when you've got the right messaging. And then that's when it's worth manually following up and transitioning that relationship and moving it outside of LinkedIn, so that they're actually getting to know you and, getting them into the process of investing in your projects.
Yeah, but you're initiating the conversation, and you're kind of trying to get them to kind of the fish to bite without being manually doing all that. That makes a lot of sense.
Mm-hmm.
So for real estate investors, are there any, I guess, must do, best kept secrets, ways that you're seeing the people have really had success? I mean, is basically like what we're talking about, is make sure you've got your criteria, you've got your profile set up, and then start the messaging?
Well, it's all about messaging, right? I mean, the best kept secret is that this is a lot of people don't even know what they don't know, that this is possible and that you can attract investors from anywhere in the world using this strategy. But the biggest thing is you need to build trust using your messaging. I cannot emphasize that enough. I mean, it's if you don't have that trust, you're shooting yourself in the foot, really. So it's having concise messaging, having messaging that gets people to raise their hand first, and not talking to people like you would offline, right? Because it's online, it is really, really different. And it's to have a methodology too, right? It's to be intentional about it. The other big thing, and I'm going to get on a soapbox for a second, is there's a lot of quote unquote digital marketers and gurus out there who talk about posting, right? You've got to post 5 times a day. Like, that's BS, man. I mean, it's nothing to do with posting frequency. Just because you put more time into something doesn't mean it's going to pay off more. That's like the whole work hard but not work smart deal. It's just not really what generates the results that you want. So instead of doing that, have a methodology where you can actually generate real leads. And if you're going to post something, use it to supplement that and make yourself more relevant. That's another big thing.
No, I love that, because I think there is this notion that if you're not posting, 5 times a day and, staying up all night, or I mean, I don't know how people do it other than that's basically become their job, is posting online, especially if they're doing it themselves. And I don't know, I tend to think there's so much, I mean, there's so many people that are trying to compete for your attention. After a while, it almost like it feels like there's a lot of noise. Whereas if you have a specific, it's almost like getting a handwritten letter anymore, really stands out. Just like what you're saying is if there is a message that's specific to you and you open it up and it's not some lengthy, blah kind of a message. I mean, I know I've had success in reaching out to people on LinkedIn and basically doing, like you're saying, just kind of a small, not an ask for a buy or something like that, but hey, Yakov, I saw you on this. Just wanted to say I really appreciated, like if I heard somebody on a podcast or if I read something where they were mentioned, or, congratulate them on something I saw. I've been pleasantly surprised by the positive, response, as opposed to some of the overwhelming dread I get when I see my inbox and it's just full of these, complete offers, just sign here, kind of thing. So that's good. I'm just looking down here. As far as the ideal, who would you say is an ideal candidate for implementing LinkedIn as a strategy to, is there anybody that this doesn't work for?
Who this doesn't work for. So today's conversation is specifically around a strategy for attracting investors and raising capital. So, but overall, I mean, I've worked with people in some different niches and industries. This doesn't work for someone, for example, who wants to sell trinkets online or do e-commerce. I mean, it's not what we're talking about here, right? So it's about high quality lead generation. What the methodology we're talking about today specifically is for real estate entrepreneurs or people who are building up syndications, or maybe wanting to reinvent themselves, or maybe they've been in the business for a while and they want to raise more capital, or now that they're not networking with people in person, they want a way to create those key contacts. So that's who this is really designed for. And it's designed, the way that I look at it always is big picture, is that it's designed for a system that you can rely on. Because the biggest thing, I think, if you sliced it down to one thing, this is a way for you, if you're listening right now, to put yourself back in control of your lead generation, to not have to sporadically scramble to raise capital or only rely on people in your sphere of influence. This completely gets rid of those limits for you and puts you back in control. And that's who this is really
for. Another question that occurred to me, you've not mentioned once paid advertising on LinkedIn. You've spoken pretty much about the profile, which last I checked, a free account will give you a profile. Mm-hmm. And I believe you can message people you're connected to unless you have a paid account. Is that still the case? I don't know.
You can do that with a free account. So LinkedIn advertising for most people right now doesn't make sense. I mean, it's an expensive place to advertise, and all these strategies that we're talking about, the direct messaging, the profile, you can do that organically without spending any money on additional advertising. The things that I recommend, spending money on, what I personally spend money on when it comes to LinkedIn marketing, is on the premium account, Sales Navigator, because that's its own type of CRM, and it gives you much better and more specific searches. So it's well worth it. And then, the different automation software, and then obviously, whatever people's back end and CRMs, people do things a little differently there. So there's no need for paid LinkedIn advertising. It's just not a good investment right now. And even if it was, paid advertising is a whole different conversation, because that requires a whole different marketing and advertising skill set that the good news isn't really necessary on LinkedIn for attracting investors.
Gotcha. One of the things I know that on all the platforms is there's constantly changes occurring. Are there any recent changes or coming changes to LinkedIn that people should be aware of?
Well, the big change is just the caliber of audience, right? I mean, it's been evolving. I think the thing that really triggered a lot of these changes was a few years ago, Microsoft purchased LinkedIn. They bought it for $26.2 billion. And since buying LinkedIn, they've completely revamped the platform. It's much easier to use than it's ever been before. You don't have to be a tech whiz. And just to give you some stats, LinkedIn has about 675 million users right now. That number has grown significantly in the past few years. Fastest growing age group on LinkedIn, 25 to 35-year-olds. So you have people who are actually younger and successful, and they're there for very different reasons than other social media. And a lot of people are getting tired of Facebook because of politics and different things. And the only social media that they're spending any significant amount of time on has become LinkedIn. Same thing with C-level executives, high-level business professionals. LinkedIn has become their social media of choice. I mean, so much so that the average household income on LinkedIn is $115,000, and that's an average household income. So, you think about all those things, and you also think about their vision. They want, because the reason LinkedIn makes money is when people invest in premium accounts and paid ads and businesses and all those different things. But the big thing is they want people to spend more time there. So they've made it more user-friendly. They have a bigger sense of community than ever before. And so people are spending more time. Their vision as a company, they want to get to 2.2 billion users by the end of 2022. So they're actively expanding. They're growing in other countries as well. So that audience, right, no matter who your ideal investor is, you can either reach them directly on LinkedIn, or you can reach somebody who's a trusted advisor to that ideal audience. So there is that direct opportunity for you on LinkedIn. The other big change, and this also is a good way to answer your question, is video and content. Personality-driven content has really come onto the scene on LinkedIn, okay? Because it used to be stuffy and professional and boring. People are tired of that, especially now. They want to feel connected. They want some personality. So personality-driven content is a great thing to include. Video is getting more exposure. LinkedIn Live is coming onto the scene. LinkedIn Stories are coming onto the scene. So it's just becoming more of a personality-driven platform, and it's becoming a place where people are paying more attention. Everyone's looking for something refreshing, especially right now. Everyone's, people who wouldn't have otherwise been open to, let's say, alternative investment opportunities or new ideas. There's a different openness right now when the message is delivered the right way.
That's good. I know it's changed a lot in the time I've used it. I can remember when I first got on, I didn't know what it was or how to use it. Talked to some friends, they didn't quite understand it either. But I know it's been a great opportunity to connect with professionals and make some business connections and stuff. And These are all good ideas and good points. Um, if we could, I'd like to shift gears here for a second. As I mentioned to you before we started, by day, I'm an insurance broker, and I work with my clients to assess risk and determine what to do with risk. And we typically consider one of three different strategies. The first is we look to see, can we avoid the risk? If we can't avoid the risk, then we consider, is there a way to minimize the risk? And if neither are an option, then we look to see if there's a way to transfer the risk. And that's what an insurance policy is. And so what I like to do is I like to ask my guest if they can identify what they consider to be the biggest risk. And for clarity's sake, I'm not necessarily looking for an insurance-related answer. But if you're willing, I'd like to ask you, Yakov Smart, what is the biggest risk?
Right, and it's a great question. It's not something that I honestly think about on a daily basis. I guess you're a little more you see a lot more different scenarios as being in insurance than I probably do when it comes to risk. But I'm gonna give a little bit of what might be a bit of a surprising answer here. I think the biggest risk is a combination of plagiarism and misinformation, because in the space of, let's call it mentorship, or online programs or coaching consulting, there's a lot of knockoffs. There's a lot of people who hear something, it's good, they claim it as their own, or they put a slightly different flavor on it, and they go and they completely knock off content, ideas, intellectual property. And they, sometimes do it without repercussions, sometimes do it for a while. So, it has a lot of people in the space that I'm in, and also, a lot of coaches in the real estate space as well, specifically. A lot of us understand that the bigger we get, especially if we want any scalability or reach or impact, that's just a risk that naturally comes up. So, to mitigate that risk, and what puts me at ease around it, is somebody could duplicate content, okay, and plagiarize it and do whatever. But what I know at the end of the day is the unique way that I have of delivering it, and also with working with people, that's just not duplicatable, because that's personally my unique perspective, my insight, my approach, my methodology. So and the other side of that is misinformation. Someone can play the blame game and say, well, they could do something stupid, for example, on LinkedIn, and post their deal and, not be compliant with the SEC. Not something that I would tell them to do, first of all, but they could say, well, that guy said I can market on LinkedIn, so why can't I post my deal and say invest now on it, just to the public? Like, it's, obviously something that I wouldn't recommend anybody does, but sometimes there's misinformation, or people misconstrue things, and human error. So it's always a risk too. Humans are humans.
Yeah, that's something you don't want to get in, sideways with the SEC or any of the authorities on that. But yeah, I think that's a risk that I don't know that everybody fully understands. I think in the age of Twitter and all these other things, where people are like so compelled to get a reaction, or get their voice out there, you do run the risk of having regret for something you put out there, or maybe not having all the facts, kind of thing. So that's good.
Yeah, and the key thing I want to add to that real quick, right? Because, and I want people to understand this, because this is really important. Nothing that we talked about today was, hey, you've got a deal, just put it out to the public. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about building a relationship. And then once the relationship is built with that investor, talking about specific deals and numbers. That's really, really important.
Right. And even I think the thing that I take away from this more than anything, the goal is to get offline.
Absolutely.
That's as much as we have become kind of used to the online relationship. The goal really to have a relationship is to get it offline. So that's a good reminder. Yakov, where can the listeners go if they'd like to learn more or connect with you?
So there's a couple of things. The easiest way is if they go to linkedleads.us I'm sure we can include this in the notes as well. It's linkedleads.us, not LinkedIn leads, linkedleads.us /raising capital webinar. If you like this stuff, if it appeals to you, if you listen to this and you want to know more, it's a free training. You can go, and we usually run a couple of these a week. You can sign up for the free training, and it's a webinar where I'll cover this methodology in greater detail on how to raise more capital and make key real estate contacts using LinkedIn. And then, of course, anyone who would like, you can send me a connection request on LinkedIn. Yakov Smart, let me know you heard about me on the show. We'd be glad to get connected with each and every one of you on LinkedIn as well.
Awesome. Yakov, I've really enjoyed our talk, and I've learned a lot. And I can't say thanks enough for taking the time, and I hope we can do it again soon.
You're welcome. It was a pleasure.
All right. For our listeners, if you like this episode, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Remember, the more you know, the more you grow. That's all we've got this week. Until next time, thanks for listening to Commercial Real Estate Pro Network's CREPN Radio.